Also, despite Russia's attacks on Ukraine, the US still hoping that a broad ceasefire, full ceasefire deal can be reached before Easter, before the April 20th. What are the chances for that, a full ceasefire before Easter?
Well, do you mean an agreement to a ceasefire or an actual ceasefire?
Actual ceasefire, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say there's zero chance of that being done before Easter, because a ceasefire that's in name only is not in my view, is not really a ceasefire, because Russia has demonstrated that they will violate it immediately unless there is a force there to compel them to live up to their agreement. So that's why I'm skeptical about any sort of agreement that happens in just the next few weeks. I mean, they may get an agreement, but if there's no force in place to compel compliance, it's not going to be worth anything. I mean, I don't think anybody seriously believes that Russia will not begin testing the ceasefire and our willingness to enforce it immediately. So, that's why getting a ceasefire implementation force trained and ready and deployed and in place is critical. And there's not going to be, at least I don't think, I think Ukrainian government will be reluctant to enter into real negotiations without having a ceasefire that is correctly observed by the Russians in place, because otherwise they would never be able to trust that Russia would live up to whatever the agreement is from the negotiations. So I look at this whole process, we're in three phases. The first phase is where we are now, the preparation phase. All of these talks, all of these discussions going on in Saudi Arabia, in Kyiv, in the White House, in Paris, in London, in Brussels, all of this is the preparation phase that is designed to get to a ceasefire. Now, this is not clean. It's not quite that black and white, but I'm describing this in broad stages. So this first stage or phase is the preparation phase. The second phase is the actual agreement and declaration of a ceasefire with a force that is deployed that can compel Russia to live up to the ceasefire. And then the third phase, now you can have real negotiations about the long-term outcome of this conflict, with Ukrainian sovereignty being protected. This is why President Zelenskyy has correctly said he needs a security guarantee, because he knows that Russia has zero chance that Russia lives up to any agreement where there's not some sort of security apparatus in place that would force Russia to live up to it. So if you send some people in white SUVs, observers with baseball caps, the Russians will dismiss them just like they did after Minsk ceasefires, no matter how brave these OSCE observers are. If you send in a UN force with blue helmets, they will be disregarded immediately. It has to be a real force that has rules of engagement that allow them to inflict consequences on Russians immediately when the Russians violate the ceasefire. This is going to take months to get that in place, unfortunately.
You just mentioned about the deterrent force. British special forces have been put on high alert to prepare for the potential deployment to Ukraine, according to the paper. How can allies, European allies, perform in Ukraine without the US backstop?
Well, look, Europe, when they work together, has enormous economic advantage over Russia. So there's economic leverage already that's there. And then when you start adding together the defense industries of all of European countries, it's way more than what Russia has. And then when you add together military capabilities of European nations, it's more than what Russia has, except in terms of nuclear weapons. So yes, of course, I wish that the United States would be a part of this in some way, but if they're not, that doesn't change the requirement. That doesn't eliminate the need or the threat. just because the U.S. chooses not to be a part of it. And so this is going to be a real test, a test of whether or not Europe can meet the moment that affects its security for decades to come. Yes, they can do it, but only if they summon the political will. And I think some countries have shown that they do have the will, and then maybe others will join.
You have also supported European Sky Shield initiative to defend Ukrainian skies as a part of this peacekeeping mission. Would it be possible also without participation of the US Air Force?
All of this is possible if you have the political will. It won't be as effective in the beginning because the U.S. has always provided not just aircraft, but also the command and control, the intelligence, all the things necessary to conduct something like these air superiority missions. But regardless, if there is a ceasefire implementation force that goes in at some point, regardless of what it looks like and how it's deployed, it will have to have air and missile defense already established before it goes into Ukraine. Otherwise, they will be vulnerable to Russian missile strikes. And I think getting this so-called Sky Shield in place first will be important if we hope to have an effective deployment of a ceasefire implementation force. People should not be somehow in the false hope or belief that Russia won't shoot at a NATO country. Soldiers deployed into Ukraine are going to be vulnerable. And so we have to go in properly armed, properly equipped, ready to deter Russia from within Ukraine.
Let's also cover breaking news from the United States. White House confirms that a journalist had been added to an unsecure group in Signal, in which Trump's national security team discussed strikes on Yemen. How harmful is this incident for the U.S. national security?
Well, it's harmful in a couple of different ways. Number one, just the fact that now our adversaries know that we have leaders at the very highest level are using their cell phones on Signal to talk about the highest level classified information. I mean, this will not be the first time they will have done that. If they felt comfortable setting up a chat group and using emojis and talking about specifics about an operation that was about to happen, then obviously they've been doing it before, which means they do not have an appreciation or respect for the cumbersome procedures you're supposed to use when you're discussing highly classified information like this. So that right there tells foreign intelligence services that there's potentially opportunity where they could find a lot more information. Signal is very good, but it is not a perfect secure. Otherwise, if it was perfect, we'd all be using it all the time for classified information. The second thing is that it revealed a disdain for Europe. Now, that's not a surprise to most Europeans, but the fact that they would be making decisions and talking about Europeans, our allies, in such a way shows a gross lack of respect and also a lack of appreciation for what our allies do and provide to the United States: aerial refueling, bases, intelligence sharing, and so on. So this is dangerous for us because now allies, I think, are going to be even more reluctant to share information and share intelligence with us. They won't advertise it. They won't say, hey, U.S., sorry, we're no longer going to share with you, but they will stop sharing things. They'll begin to withhold because they'll be so concerned at this lack of discipline and unprofessional conduct at the top level. This is not good. And then the third thing, I worry, there has to have been a senior officer somewhere in, even if they weren't on this chat group, if there are senior officers that are aware of these kinds of things going on, they have a duty to call it out, to say, Mr. Secretary, you cannot do this. This is, number one, it's illegal. Number two, it's a violation of all of our normal security protocols. And number three, it puts our airmen at risk. People who would be conducting the missions, it puts them at risk. And so I hope that senior officers have been pushing back on this. Otherwise, they become a part of it. People have to make their own decisions, but in normal times, a lot of people would be getting fired after this incident. There would be huge investigations. The Congress is going to have to do, congressional oversight committees should be calling for hearings, and people should be resigning. I mean, probably, first of all, the National Security Advisor, and several others. If this was normal times, people would be resigning. Instead, what we see is the president saying, I didn't know anything about this. The Secretary of Defense immediately blaming the Mr. Goldberg from the Atlantic as being, going after his credibility, even after his own department had acknowledged, or after the administration had acknowledged, that this conversation did in fact happen. So I've always believed that the first principle of leadership is accepting responsibility, and I'm not seeing that right now.
And do you also expect European allies to be more reluctant to buy American weaponry after this incident and after statements from the US leadership?
Yeah, I think countries make big decisions based on confidence in who they're dealing with, and I think most of our allies, unfortunately, were already beginning to be worried, and this will only add to their concern. Now, what I hope is that the administration will take appropriate action to regain the confidence of allies and partners, as well as customers. I mean, for our own economic interests, this is the duty of the administration to regain confidence, not to go after journalists and blame them.
Also, yes, President Donald Trump has directed to create an Iron Dome over the continental US to protect the United States from the air threats. According to CNN, Trump has insisted that the US needs to have similar to Israel's Iron Dome. What is your assessment of such a plan?
Well, of course, it is the duty of the president to protect Americans and protect our strategic interests. We need to be clear about what threats we're talking about, and the costs of doing this. And by the way, the incredible importance of Canada as a part of this defense of North America. I mean, Canada has been a part of this structure for a very long time, and so I think the effect is needed, but the capability to do that is not going to be thousands of Iron Dome missile systems. It's going to be a combination of things of air, land-based systems, and of course, a lot of this has to happen forward in Europe and in other places. So we need access that we get from our allies. And so you can't say you want to have an Iron Dome and then go around smashing relationships with our allies.
Also, President Trump announced the decision to move forward with the next generation fighter jet titled F-47. Is the price of the project worth it?
I think this is what will always be a part of the balancing act. I mean, people laughed when President Reagan talked about the Star Wars strategic defense initiative, how expensive it would be. But it was laying out the vision for that drove research and development, that drove the deployment of necessary satellites and other systems. So I'm not against it, but we need to be realistic about expectations. And again, it won't happen without support from our allies.
And let's cover our final topic. Israel is making plans for potential major ground offensive into Gaza. stripped after recent airstrikes on Gaza and Lebanon. Could this lead to the end of ceasefire deal?
You know, I'm confused. The Trump administration during the campaign before the election, Mr. Trump and his team kept talking about ending wars, to be stop wars everywhere. And instead, here we are now, 2 months into the administration, and he has not yet stopped the war, Russia's war against Ukraine. He's ramping up aggression against the Houthis, and now Israel is violating ceasefire agreements and changing the dynamics there, which raises, I think, the risk of a conflict with Iran. And there's nothing about China. I mean, China was supposed to be the main strategic objective. Let's stop all this other stuff and focus on China. And so I don't see the connection. I don't see the strategy. By the way, I'm all for destroying the Houthis. I'm all for seeing Iran isolated, and that regime that treats its own people so terrible, seeing it overthrown. The best way to do that, of course, is help Ukraine defeat Russia. Then Iran is isolated. It's no longer able to help Hamas. It's no longer able to help the Houthis. It's no longer able to support Hezbollah. And that would send a strong message of deterrence to China. Instead, what we see is incoherence. I don't see the strategic approach.
Thank you, General Hodges, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Heroam Slava. Thank you, Daniel.
Let's cover also Ukraine's ceasefire negotiations. Russia has agreed to ceasefire in the Black Sea and to partial ceasefire in the air to halt attacks on Ukrainian energy grid. What is your assessment of this stage of negotiations, and what kind of game Russia is playing, Vladimir Putin and his negotiators?
Well, I think Ukraine has been very forward-leaning and very positive for the ceasefire, and seems to be doing all that it can to try and get the ceasefire enacted. Because when Ukraine agreed to a 30-day ceasefire some time ago, and the Russians sort of agreed to it, but then attacked Ukraine infrastructure virtually before the ink was dry on the paper, and showed no signs at all of wanting a ceasefire. It would appear that the Russian solution to a ceasefire is what we're calling the Black Sea deal. In other words, allowing Russia to export goods through the Black Sea, or allowing the Russian Black Sea fleet, which Ukraine has already defeated, back into the game. And also for the prevention of attacks on power infrastructure in both countries. And I think it's very important that people in the international world realize that it's actually Russia who is suffering most. Ukraine has been very successful at attacking the hydrocarbon industry in Russia, the oil and gas. And that is where Russia is getting all its money from various countries to keep its war machine going. Russia has tried to turn off the lights and turn off the heat for the last 3 winters in Ukraine by attacking its power infrastructure, and has failed. And then we hear that Russia is demanding an end to sanctions and an opening up of the world banking facilities to Russia, which is something new, which they just throw in there so that they can say that the ceasefire has failed. So it strikes me at the moment that Putin and his negotiators are writing ceasefire deals that the Americans and others are helping with, but it's only to the advantage of Russia rather than Ukraine. And Ukraine seems to be the only country that's honouring these ceasefires. They are a little bit like the 30-day ceasefire a few weeks ago. The ink is not dry on signing these agreements before the Russians break them. So Russia is not negotiating in good faith at the moment. And that is something that I think the European NATO countries, particularly Britain and France, realise. At the moment, America and the White House has its own problems of trying to sort out various leaks and others, and is less focused on this problem than really everybody else in the world would like them to be.
At the same time, Trump's national security team is really confident that a full ceasefire deal could be reached between the US, Russia and Ukraine. Do you still expect Russia to agree with a full ceasefire deal this year?
Well, one would hope so. And a lot of it does rely on the United States. It's from negotiations in Paris today. It's clear that the British and the French and some other European countries are planning to commit forces, military forces to Ukraine as a reinsurance force to guarantee a ceasefire. But it's really up to the Americans to bring Putin to the ceasefire table and get them to sign it. And at the moment, that does not seem to be the case. Certainly some of the key American negotiators seem to be more on the Moscow side than Kyiv's side, which is, seems inconceivable to us people in the UK in particular. So a full ceasefire is absolutely possible. It is going to require President Trump and some of his key supporters to get off the fence, as it were, and really lean into this. And it would appear that the European countries, led by Britain and France, are planning and ready and happy to commit military forces to Ukraine to protect and enforce a ceasefire. So it's still possible. And I think everybody, is hoping and praying that it will come to fruition. But it really needs Putin to shift and move. And at the moment, although he's saying he wants a ceasefire, his actions are not the same as what he's saying. And he at the moment seems to have no indication or desire for a ceasefire. But things may change, and it is only really the Americans at this stage who can force Putin's hand, I expect, to come to the table and find a long and lasting and proper ceasefire.
Also, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says that Russia is preparing another offensive deep inside Ukraine into the Sumy region, Kharkiv region and Zaporizhia region, according to the Ukrainian intelligence. What could this development indicate from your perspective? And do you feel that Donald Trump would be humiliated if Russia launches another attack deep inside Ukraine during negotiations?
Well, I expect Ukrainian intelligence is very good. And we know that there have been a lot of attacks in the Sumy region at the moment. We also know that the Russians have recently said there is no way that they're going to give Ukraine back the Zaporizhia nuclear power station, which it's theft, which they've stolen off the Ukrainians. And we also know that President Putin, part of his stipulations for peace is that the 4 oblasts, which they've illegally taken but don't completely hold, he insists that they are integrated into Russia completely. And in order to do that, he would need to take them. So I think there is a realistic possibility that the Russians are planning that. But I also agree it would be a complete humiliation to President Trump, because no doubt American intelligence is seeing the build-up of these forces and, the potential for a successful attack really under the noses of the Americans is almost inconceivable. So it is certainly likely, and one will have to see. The rhetoric coming out of the White House does seem to change on an almost daily basis, but it's gone quiet recently after the dreadful security breach that came about from signal messages being published widely on the world media, talking about Americans attacking Houthis and Americans' view on Europe and the Ukraine conflict. So we shall just have to wait and see. But it's good, I think, that the Ukrainian government and military have put these potential attacks in the sort of open source and public domain, so nobody can say they didn't know if they do come to fruition. So, yeah, it's very tense times, I think, in that part of Ukraine at the moment, I'm sure.